Hello and thank you for joining me here today. Today I'm going to share a couple of masculine cards I made loosely connected to the Retro TV program challenge over at Mystical Scrapbooks for May and June. This first card uses a few of the requirements for week 2, so shades of blue and a grid layout. So I've chosen a piece of sort of speckly blue cardstock from my stash, and I've cut it 5 1/4 by 10 1/2, and I have scored it at 5 1/4 on the 10 1/2 inch edge. Now I'm going to fold it over and use my Teflon bone folder to burnish that fold so it sits nice and flat. To create the grid layout, I'm going to use Uniquely Creative's Country Roads paper. This particular paper is the back paddock, and I've used my Spellbinders squares die to cut 4 squares from that pattern. The squares are about 2 inches in size. I'm going to take my distressing tool. This is a Prima tool that's been discontinued. Tim Holtz puts one out that hasn't got a handle, it's just a little circle with some blades in it. Or if you haven't got a distressing tool, you could always use the blade of your scissors. So I'm going to distress the edges of each of those squares and with the tool, and then I'm going to ink the edges with my Versa colour black ink cube. For an extra layer on my card, I've taken this Couture Creations Flamingos and Hedgehogs 3D embossing folder, and I've cut a piece of white cardstock that's 5 inches square. And now I'm going to ink around the edge of that in preparation to sticking it to the front of my card base. Now I'm going to use my liquid glue. I use art glitter glue and love it, to attach some pieces of scrap cardboard. This is an old box that I bought some water in, I think. So I'm just going to attach that cardboard to the back of those squares. I find that the cardboard doesn't sink in at any time. It can stand a good amount of pressure, and it makes sure that the height on my cards is maintained. Next, I'm going to use double-sided tape to attach that embossed piece of white cardstock to the front of my card base, and then I'm going to attach my squares on top of that. The sentiment I'm going to use on this card comes from one of Uniquely Creative's kits. It just says happy birthday and it's on a pale blue background, so I'm just going to use my trimmer and trim that down to the size I want. Then I'm going to ink around it with my black ink cube. To add a little more texture to my card, I'm going to use some of this burlap ribbon. I'm going to trim it down so that it is slightly bigger than my sentiment, and then I'm going to fray so that the narrow ends of the burlap are frayed. Then I'm going to attach that to a piece of the same cardstock that I made the card base out of, and then trim that down to size. I distress the edges of the cardstock with both the distressing tool and the black ink cube, and then I use my liquid glue to attach the burlap piece to that, and then I add a piece of the same cardboard to the back of that, ready to attach that to my card. To embellish this card, I'm going to use these metal embellishments from Uniquely Creative. They're called silver metal cogs, and I'm just going to scatter some of those so they look like they're falling from the top left hand corner down towards the sentiment, sort of drawing your attention down to the sentiment. So I'm going to use my liquid glue to attach those, and then I'm going to attach my sentiment to the card. I also attached a tiny cog to the sentiment panel. I will put a link to the challenge, the competition, over at Mystical Scrapbooks in the description box below, and I'll also put a link to the products I've used if you're interested in looking at those. So there's our first card, very simple but effective, using that grid style and shades of blue. Now for the next card, I'm using elements from week 4, which was the Beverly Hillbillies, and it's a vintage card, and I'm using washi tape. So going with the vintage theme, I'm using a light craft cardstock as my card base. I've made it the same size as the previous card, which is 5¼ inches square. With this competition, there's an optional kit you can buy, and this piece of terracotta coloured cardstock was in that kit, as were those tiny chipboard stars next to me there. So I'm going to use that to go with my vintage colouring. I'm going to trim that down to 5 inches square. The pattern paper I'm using for this one comes from Uniquely Creative's Drive and Fly paper range, and this one's called Train. Now I particularly like those arrows, and that's why I've chosen this section of this paper, and I'm trimming that down to 4½ inches square. So now I'm going to distress all of the edges of the pattern paper and the plain cardstock in the same way that I did for the first card. Time now to paint those stars from the optional kit. I'm going to start off by giving them a coat of white acrylic paint. I'm just laying them on a piece of scrap paper here, I'm actually giving them 2 coats of white because I want the colour to, when I paint them with the colour, to be true. So while I'm waiting for those to dry, I'm going to play around with the washi tape that came in the kit. So there's 2 different types. I'm going to use both of them, and I'm just going to tear pieces. This stripe piece, the first piece I put on, I'm just going to tear that and wrap that edge around. Wrap it around the edge, down, and I'm going to put that down the bottom of the pattern paper, going across. Then the other washi tape, I'm going to tear a piece of that, but I'm going to tear the edge of it, so the top edge of it, so it's a bit jagged and comes down into a bit of a point, and then lay that over the top of the stripe. Then some of the little strips or scraps that I've got left over, I'm going to just attach those at the top right hand corner of the card panel. I remembered that I had some chipboard arrows, so I got out my Dusty Attic Perfect Moment chipboard. I'd already painted it white, so that was lucky. And I'm going to include that with my stars on the front of my card. I'm just playing around with placement here before I give my chipboard a coat of colour. So to colour my chipboard, I wanted the colour of the chipboard to be about the same colour as that rusty coloured plain cardstock in the background. So I've got some opaque stains here, or some acrylic paint in rust. The colour is rust, and I give each piece 1 coat of that, and then I have some metallic paint in copper, which is very, very close to that terracotta colour. So once that rust colour is dry, I give the chipboard a coat of the copper, and that gives it a nice metallic sheen. I let that dry between the 2 coats, and when I'd applied the second coat, I then set that aside to dry again. I went ahead and attached a piece of that same scrap cardboard to the back of that rusty coloured plain cardstock. The pattern paper panel was then attached to the terracotta coloured cardstock, and then the whole panel was attached to the card front. The sentiment for this card comes from this Paper Roses All Occasions sentiment sheets. This pack of sentiments is a great pack. It's 12 A5 sheets of paper. There are 2 sheets of each design, and there are black on white sections, and there are white on black, and they both say the same thing. So, and I think every occasion that you can think of is covered by this pack. So I just used my scissors to trim out the one that I wanted to use today. My chipboard is dry now, so I'm going to use my art glitter glue to attach all of my chipboard pieces. And that completes my second card for today. So this one here uses quite a few things from the optional kit. the washi tape was a requirement and the vintage was a requirement, so I think I've got those two covered. I've used some other chipboard elements from the optional kit as well. So yeah, so as I said, I'm going to leave a link to the competition down below. I think we're up to about week 4 now. So yeah, pop over, check it out, and also I will link the products that I've used if I can find them in the store. I will leave a link to the whole shop so you can go over there and check it out. This is an Australian store. They're based in Perth, so yeah, should be for all of you Australian people, should be great for delivery. So yeah, thanks for watching my video today. I hope you've enjoyed it, and if you're not a subscriber, I'd love it if you would subscribe to my channel and give me a thumbs up and the likes and all those things. Comments, I love your comments. So if you've got time, leave me a comment and I'll definitely get back to you with an answer. So I hope you can join me when I post my next video. Okay, bye.